Hi everyone, welcome to episode 55 of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast, a weekly recap and review from August 14th to August 20th. First of all, I'm doing this episode in Washington, D.C. I'm out of Los Angeles for this week. I wanted to make sure I get it in. And because of that, I have all my editing capabilities, so I don't have the regular intro I put. So I wanted to start off with a disclaimer saying that all the information provided here is not considered legal advice. If you're a non-attorney listening to this or an attorney, please consult with another attorney to make sure you get the answers that are proper for your case. Without further ado, I'm going to get it started. Right off the bat, as you all know, there's been a lot of incivility and chaos going around across the country. A lot of it has to do with statues of old Civil War veterans and generals being torn down. But a core part, and I think even more important reasons why those protests are happening in the first place, is immigration. Those groups, so-called white nationalists or white supremacists, all those kind of Nazi kind of S groups or fascist or extreme socialist kind of groups, they are protesting immigration to the U.S. And so at the core is what we do, and it's affected in an unruly fashion, which is turning to violence. So be very careful. It's a very risky time to be an immigrant and be an immigration lawyer. In Los Angeles, in Southern California, I should say, there's another big hate rally happening today. I think it's Laguna Beach. They're going to protest immigration and want to cut down immigration, all that kind of stuff, and there's going to be counter-protests. So this is happening everywhere. And sometimes I think, because I'm in Los Angeles on the west side, this kind of things don't happen. But in every state and every part of every city, there are groups that do think like this. So there is a huge spectrum of opinions in regards to immigration, and just because you're in a major city doesn't mean that you're going to find people that are all pro-immigration, or at least pro-lawful immigration, or some sort of system for people to be able to come into the United States and contribute to society over here. Trump is helping this obviously along with his rhetoric. He's pushing local sheriffs who are jailing people to do a dragnet system for those sheriffs that participate to just put holds on anyone who doesn't have status until federal authorities could come in. They're pushing this against the sanctuary cities, the so-called sanctuary cities, but it's a reality that's increasing. And as we saw this week, the advisor Bannon was fired or he quit or whichever, and it's hard to say if that's going to be a net positive or a minus in the current circumstances. I mean, obviously he was pretty anti-immigration, but allegedly he was pro-deferred action or DACA. So now that he's gone, how is that going to be affected in the system? Is DACA going to go away? It's a no. Now Trump has former DHS who was temporarily the DHS secretary, now his, what do they call it, the chief of staff or something like that. What kind of position is he going to have on immigration? What are his personal beliefs on immigration? I haven't looked into that much, but it's going to affect things. So far, the whole strategy of the administration in regards to their own priorities has been a mess. So we'll have to see what's actually going to happen and with these kind of cases. And speaking of the mess, one of the most important and biggest pushes President Trump had when he came into power was his first speech saying we're going to increase Border Patrol, I think like 2,000 more people. Reality is they have less people today than they had when he came in. There's a lot of people that don't get hired. There's a lot of people that are leaving. Morale is very low in CBP, Customs and Border Protection. And so it's difficult to hold on and keep people and bring in new people. The process for getting good people to come in is very hard too, especially the amount of background checks they have to do because they're, as I've talked about before, there's a high-risk group that could be susceptible to corruption from the Mexican drug cartels in the South and all sorts of other groups. So you got to be very careful of who you make a Border Patrol agent. CBP is the government's biggest law enforcement agency there is. They have most, I guess, resources combined with people. I listened to that in a major newspaper article today. So it's going to be difficult what to do. I don't think it's realistic to increase them other than decreasing their requirements, how good they have to be, and that's not a good solution either. So I think the solution is just make legal immigration better, easier, make it easier for people to come here so that CBP doesn't have to we don't have to rely on CBP so much to deal with inadmissibility issues, for example. They should be focused on agricultural issues, police issues of people like, are human trafficking, this kind of stuff. But to put their focus on inadmissibility and frankly on the drug war too, the further legalization of drugs will alleviate their responsibilities so they can focus on things that actually affect the population, which is again human smuggling, trafficking, agricultural issues that are coming in, causing plants to go bad, and our farms get hit. All that kind of stuff should be the focus. And this happens, the issue is also in northern border, there's a lot of different checkpoints there that are in these little towns that no one lives in, And it's hard finding border officers that'll go and man those areas, because at every border check, there always has to be 2 border officers. So if you're in the middle of the huge border with Canada and you're in the city where there's more moose that cross the border than people, literally, it's very difficult to be a trained CBP officer with all the knowledge, education, personal training, law enforcement training, and just sit there dealing with 1 or 2 cars that go by every day. Obviously, people don't want to do that, even if it is easy money for them to just sit there. Someone that dedicated to go through the academy doesn't find it exciting to do something like that. So these places aren't manned. They're trying to give incentives to fill those positions up, but that's difficult to do too. So that problem exists. The best way to just alleviate pressures on the responsibility of the CBP, maybe shut down some of these Canadian borders that are not used as much and just herd them into one major areas so that more numbers could go. That's not that good of an idea either, but if we're going to leave, if it's difficult to fill up these positions with good officers, then we got to do something. On the second front, the administration's pushback, and it's not purely from the administration on this one. Obviously, there's this meme of Russia doing stuff to the U.S. My opinion is they're always doing stuff to us, and we're always doing stuff back. It's just foreign relations. But because of that, Congress passed some bills against Russia, sanctions of sorts, and Russia responded, and they're kicking out State Department employees in Russia that work at the embassies and the Department of State. Well, as a consequence, today the U.S. State Department announced that they're shutting down non-immigrant visa processing for the next month or 2 in Russia. And then when they reschedule it, it'll only happen in Moscow. So there's 4 other consulates. I think there's Moscow's the main one. There's Vladivostok. There's Yekaterinburg. There's St. Petersburg. I think there might be a 4th one. But those 3 consulates but embassies are the main ones. And if you've had Russian cases, you know how much of a hassle it is getting even a tourist visa when they deny you for no reason, or there's issues and they ask for more documents. Now everyone in Russia, it's hassle, but they have to fly all the way to Moscow just to do a non-immigrant visa. If you have a tourist visa, an L visa, all these hassles are going to come. And it's going to delay immigrant visa processing even longer. So these things have consequences for the actual people on the ground, people with families in the U.S. bringing foreign nationals to come here for marriage cases, family members come to visit, employees, all that kind of stuff are going to get affected with Russia. So if you have Russian clients, or if you potentially deal with the Russian market for immigration, there's something you have to know, be aware about today, that temporary visa, NI visas shut down temporarily, and when they come back, they're going to be in Moscow. So everyone has to travel over there. If you had a non-immigrant visa interview going into one of the consulates, you're going to get a cancellation notice this week. So that's just something to expect. The consequences of the politics are reverberating and coming down to our practices on a day-to-day basis. Now, with the crackdown on immigration, the busyness of our work has gone up because people who were here illegally, who had issues that didn't want to deal with it, out of fear are actually coming to immigration attorneys. And that releases another problem, which was a big article in a Texas newspaper of how much fraud that's going on. So obviously, there's 2 aspects to it. There's a notarial fraud and people that aren't attorneys just saying they are. And in California, they actually caught one. California bar did its job and caught one guy who was doing false claim to being an attorney and taking immigration cases. California bar did a sting and found this person had about 2,000 clients, was a non-lawyer, and they did a sting where a private investigator came in, said he wanted to do asylum, and this notario said, okay, you have an 80 to 90% chance that the way I do it, you're going to succeed, and it's $5,000 to do so. So they busted him and all the prosecution that are happening. But think about it, 2,000 clients, 5,000 a pop. Let's say he didn't do 5,000 a pop. It was just he starts high and then he negotiates down to 2,000. This guy was 2,000 times 2,000. I do the math. He made a ton of money scamming foreigners and kept on doing it. So I'm glad they got him. But this happened all over the place. In that article in Texas, it was saying it's even harder to get lawyers, and it was citing examples of immigration lawyers who take on a case, take $7,000, $10,000 from people here unlawfully that are doing menial jobs, making less than minimum wage, and not doing it the case. And that always flabbergasted me. How do immigration lawyers? I've seen this a lot, and when you see attorneys when they're on their, for example, in the California bar profile, when they write about how they were kicked out or abuses things they have. So many of the times with immigration lawyers, it's the immigration lawyer gets the money and never files anything. And years go on, and they keep asking for more money because they say something new came up. And after 5-6 years, the people complain. Probably not most of them don't because they're afraid, but one or two eventually complain. They get caught. It's like, how do you take the money and not do the job? At least get at least file something like nonsense wise. They just take the money and tell them on the phone, oh, things are processing. That's so despicable. It's unbelievable. Finally, to add insult to injury, the administration has also canceled the Central American minor parole program that came about, I think, during President Obama's administration, where all these minors were coming about from Central America with all these issues. They're paroled to the United States until they could figure something out. That's officially gone now as well. So these changes are happening again on the things that the administration could affect, things that aren't necessarily regulations in the INA and the CFR, but they're side programs that exist. They're being tweaked and they're made more difficult. So, prosecution and immigration court of people that are here illegally but are non-violent, non-criminal offenders, their deportation is going up higher. Embassy issues getting more difficult. Parole programs that are instituted by the executive, they're going away. All this stuff on the side, that on the peripheral, that are loose and could be affected by executive alone without legislative help, they are getting affected, and we're seeing that around us. So that's an interesting thing that the administration is doing. Now, with regards to practice and just ideas I had, one note is that I saw posted on one of these groups I'm in, a person said that in Pennsylvania, USCIS is interviewing standalone I-130 marriage cases. So if you have a marriage case that's I-130, for example, the spouse is here illegally, or the spouse is a green card holder, can't adjust status yet, but you filed the petition at first anyways, they're going to, in Pennsylvania, mandatorily have them come for an interview before issuing an I-130 approval. In my cases, for example, California, I just mail it in, and like 5 months later, I get an approval, and that's it. So rarely are interviews required unless some big issues exist, like some criminal issue might exist, all that kind of stuff. But for basic cases across the board in Pennsylvania, allegedly, or at least one attorney has said that they're going to interview all those standalones. Next, in my last podcast, I talked about a county in Florida that was requested Indian snake handlers from the country of India to come here and help them with their python boom, and to help cull the population of pythons, or trying to remove them from where people are. And I was wondering what kind of visa classification they use. And a good friend of the show, Lawrence in New York, said probably it was a Q visa. It's a kind of cultural exchange visa temporarily. Maybe they brought that because it's a cultural thing. Maybe that sounded like an interesting thing. But thanks so much for participating. Also, thank you to Chelsea J for contacting me. It was a pleasure getting to know you as well. One legal thing that came up regarding EB1 extraordinary ability cases on the AILA listserv was the questioner had asked if they had a case where an athlete that was about to retire wanted to come and coach in the U.S. and file EB1, do they need some sort of certification that they are a coach in the U.S.? And there were attorneys and good attorneys, and they may be right as well in certain ways. They said that it's okay, it'll be fine. My opinion is I strongly disagree with that, respectfully. And I've seen so many of this that I did a separate podcast and full report. It's podcast episode 14. It's a long one where I break down all the issues involved with someone is an athlete and then becomes a coach in the EB1, is an actor then becomes a coach, or in general pivots to a different aspect of that same field. It looks like they're doing the same thing, so you think the EB1 extraordinary ability was okay, but USCIS is quite clear. The athlete or the actor have complete different skills than a coach does. So if you're a great athlete, you won an Olympic gold medal for swimming, and then you retire and you coach, you can't get an EB1. Unless you're a great coach and you get it purely on the EB1 for coaching, you can't go back and get that for the gold medal in swimming because you're retired. The idea is that you're coming to continue what you're doing in the U.S. And what they only require is a simple statement. I've never done more. That just says, I'm coming to the U.S., I intend to continue it, I'm going to keep swimming, or I'm going to keep doing acting. And that's all they require. It's not a heavy, hardcore thing. Sometimes the embassy interviews, when they're interviewing a person for it, they might give you a tough time asking about that, but prep to clients, it's pretty simple about sustaining an additional contribution to the U.S. in your field. So if they're switching jobs, tell them not to yet until they get the EB1, and don't really talk about that. There's a small exception. I go into that in that podcast article. In that exception for coaches, they said that if the person had just ended the athletic career and started coaching, it potentially is okay, but they have to really push the fact that the coaching is great too and have things for that. In that case, I think it was a baseball player that became a coach but had good awards for coaching or something like that. It's an exception, and you have to really look into it. I would not want to mess around with it unless I had to. Stick with what they're doing. EB1As have premium processing. Get that I-130 approved. Do that immigrant visa processing. Then the person should think about switching jobs or coaching. Unfortunately, I see this a lot in F consultation where this person was great 10 years ago, then their career started dimming, and then they want EB1. I was like, I wish you just came 10 years ago, got the green card. You just made the job harder because time has gone by. But those are doable. I just wouldn't recommend it, and I'll definitely look at the cases that talk about this. And all the cases are in that podcast episode 14. I do a thorough job going over what you can cite and what delineates the lines where you can push for this kind of case. Now, finally, today is August 21st. I'm recording this. Just had the eclipse. I'm in Virginia, so we saw a little bit sooner than the West Coast probably. But it was an interesting thing to see how powerful the sun is, and so many people are going to get blinded today for looking at the sun directly. But another more interesting thing to me, and as fascinating and beautiful that image was, on the way here to D.C., we took the red eye, so we were flying like 1 or 2 p.m. in the middle of the night. And I was hoping to catch either work on the plane or to catch some sleep, and I didn't do either. But luckily, something very interesting happened. About when we were over Kansas, the pilot came and said, we might experience some turbulence, wear your seatbelts, and by the way, if you look to your right, there's a thunderstorm happening and you'll enjoy a light show. That was the first time I'd seen something like that. So I looked out the window, there was this huge lightning storm happening over some part of Kansas, East Kansas. And it was just beautiful. I've never seen lightning from above, and I've been in storms and stuff at home where you hear it and stuff, but every once in a while you hear like one lightning strike and then a couple minutes will go by and then a second. And those storms are happening, it's just non-stop lightning pounding, but it's different parts of a geographic location. You don't see them all. And it's amazing, probably the most amazingly beautiful things I've seen in my life to see that. And if you could find it on YouTube, I guess it's never going to be the same as seeing it in person, but if you could find that image, it was so beautiful. I watched the whole thing through when the plane flew by it, how electricity would just hit, a lightning strike would hit, and light up the whole sky and the whole earth for maybe a second to 2 seconds before going away until another one hit. And then there's constantly these lights punching in and out. And it was amazing, even more amazing because, that lightning, which is so much power in it, that power is enough to light up the earth for that area for about a second or two. But when you think about the sun, for hours on a day, for days and days and years and millennia, it just keeps complete sunlight and the ability to see all around you devoid of the darkness. On a constant basis. It's just how powerful the sun is, where lightning seems like a powerful thing to strike you down. It's minuscule in power as compared to the sun. That's obvious, but it was just fascinating to see the power discrepancies and just the beauty of the electricity that goes. So that was a side note. And I guess the last thing I want to talk about, which got me sad, and these are unrelated to immigration, is one of my heroes, one of the greatest people I've ever lived, Dick Gregory, passed away over the weekend. Dick Gregory was a well-known comedian, one of the first black comedians that came and really broke down the color barrier and got people exposed to people of color and big effect on civil rights. And to me, more than a comedian, he was like a leader of men and really in the civil rights movement. He was on pace with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X to really break down to the extent that he could the color barriers. And he fought that till the end of his life, dealt with a lot of problems, constantly fasting in protest to the injustice that was going on, which hurt his body a lot. Put millions of dollars of his own money where his mouth is to affect causes and to help people. And he was there with them all the civil rights movement walks and everything like that. You don't hear about him as much now in the popular mainstream because he just kept it real too much. He was the person that brought forth the Zapruder, I think, or something film that showed the video of JFK being hit that called into question the reality of the story they told us about how Kennedy died. He was the person that done that. So the powers that be didn't like the guy. And little known thing that he admitted to and said that on 9/11 he was supposed to be in one of the buildings, but he got a call beforehand that said don't go on 9/11 that day, so he didn't go to New York and wasn't caught up in the event. So he publicly spoke about these, so you can imagine why he doesn't get the biggest amount of attention. We had the other guy, Jerry Lewis, die as well over the weekend, and he was a big comedian too. Had a falling out recently with his statements about women and potentially anti-Semitic films he did and that. and that might crowd out the news media over comedians dying. You might be a bigger name in mainstream, but the effect of Dick Gregory had on me personally and had on all of us, whether you know it or not, in society, is tremendous. So it was a very sad thing. He died right here in D.C., and if there's a funeral or something, I hope to be able to attend. But that was a sad thing, but proud thing to know that someone that great exists in our time. He has videos on YouTube you can watch about him talking about different topics, but I just felt like I needed to talk about it a bit. So thank you for listening to this episode of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. As usual, I'll see you next week to recap what's going on. Please email me if you have any thoughts or questions. My email is info@jqqlaw.com, info@jqqlaw.com. I take all my own emails and messages, so feel free to contact me directly. Until next time, have a great week.